How many of us have spent years trying to fit into a world that was never designed for the way we naturally think, feel, or experience life? Today's conversation is one of those that stayed with me for long after we stopped recording. It really touched a lot of things in me, even as I went back and edited this episode. My guest, Lisa Richer, is a neurodivergent success partner and advocate transforming stuck into success for students, athletes, parents, and professionals. As the creator of the Clarity, Confidence, Courage Journey Map, she brings what and how to partner with your why. Together, you'll navigate internal, relational, and systemic roadblocks so that you can truly thrive. And on today's episode, she shares her deeply personal journey of growing up undiagnosed with ADHD, constantly hearing that she was too much, and slowly finding her way back to herself. What I love about this conversation is that it's not simply about neurodivergence. It's about what happens when we spend years believing that the way we experience the world is somehow wrong. Together, we explore masking, burnout, nervous system healing, the power of being truly seen, and why understanding ourselves isn't about collecting labels. It's about gaining the information we need to live with greater compassion and authenticity. There were so many moments that stayed with me, but one in particular was Lisa's description of the difference between asking someone, "Why are you like this?" and "Help me understand your experience." That subtle shift has the power to change relationships, parenting, leadership, therapy, and even the way we relate to ourselves. Whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or have simply spent part of your life feeling like you never quite fit, I think you'll find something meaningful in this conversation. So take a breath, get curious, and join me for my conversation with Lisa. Welcome to the Spiritually Curious Therapist, where science, spirit, and the self come together in the art of healing. I'm Jody Silverman, psychotherapist, Reiki master, and fellow seeker. Here we explore how presence, compassion, and nervous system wisdom helps us reconnect with the heart, the body, and the soul. Welcome back to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. Today we have Lisa Richer with us. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited for you to be here as well. I feel like we have so much to talk about. Lisa and I were chatting right before we hit record, and there's just so much going on in her life and the things that she's doing, and she has so much to share with us. So let's get into it. Lisa, tell us a little bit about who you are, what your journey has been, and what you're doing now, which I know is a really big question. So we'll take it slow.
All right. The first thing I'll say is I am a neurodivergent individual. I grew up undiagnosed. And as the years went on, I learned a lot about myself with taking notes and other things. So if people are watching this, I will take a lot of notes. I'll even take notes as I'm talking because that's how I process. And I've learned that even though sometimes people will say, you're not listening if you're just taking notes. But in reality, I can't listen if I'm not taking notes because I'll interject and all of those things. So that's just a little bit of something just about me. I'm a connector at the core. I'm an intuitive individual that lost sight of that many years ago because I was told to be less of what I was, to not trust my gut, to not trust my intuition. I was too emotional. I was too talkative. I was too hyper. I was too much. And through the years, I've learned to hone all of that into becoming free to be me. Growing up as an undiagnosed elite level athlete, going through school as an undiagnosed neurodivergent individual, moving into the corporate world where I like to sit in the messy middle and look at the things that are the unknown unknowns. Most people like things in a pretty package. They want a topic, an agenda, and then the middle, and then an outcome. But I live in that middle area that doesn't quite have the black and white. It's that gray, and that's how my brain works. And that's where the magic of the work I do actually happens. I have this claim that neurodiversity is the prism lighting the table. So whether I'm working with a parent, a professional, whether I'm working with someone that's in their family room, in the classroom, in the boardroom, or in the arena, we have to look at how the light is shining in that particular circumstance. And instead of deciding that someone just needs to do things the way that I do them because that makes sense to us, when you do that for someone, especially someone that's neurodivergent and thinks differently, when you're asking them to live in your world, you're never getting the best of them. And so that's part of just the pieces of who I am. And then I was gifted not one, but two neurodivergent sons, now 15 and 19, with their own neurodifferences. So all of those things. So I'm an athlete, I'm a mom, I'm a intuitive thinker, I am a neurodivergent individual, and I'm free to be me. So that's something that I keep coming back to because that really is who I am at the core. And we can talk about all these different things of who I am, but that phrase keeps coming up in any podcast appearance that I do, or someone asked me about, have I thought about writing a full book? Because I have that one chapter we talked about earlier. So some of the things I just shared are how I got to where I am today. And then I'm happy to share all those ins and outs with you and those that are in here. And then the work I do today. I don't know if we want to pause for a moment, talk through some things, and then we can keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for offering the pause because I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, like every one of those things I want to go a little bit deeper into. And I guess I'd really like to start with what was it like for you as a child to hear too much all the time?
Demeaning, a shell of myself. And I didn't understand those things, Jody, until I became an adult and until burnout and until I gave myself the gift of a therapist. Because even when you asked me that question, the hair on my arm stood up. And those things that I felt as a child, when somebody would tell me I was too much, my gut would hurt, my body would tingle. I felt most free when I was climbing up in the tippy tops of a tree and my poor great aunt was saying to my mom, "Where is Lisa? I can't see her." But I was so free up there to just be up. And it was some of that was probably my vestibular system. Little did I know, getting that rise and being ADHD and needing that thrill and that seek of the high and the calm at the same time and being one with the nature. But I grew up wanting to flip and spin and do all those things, but I didn't know why. So and I hate the word why, because the word why, when you're talking about too much, that is a term that really halts me in my tracks. It was really interesting because you had said to me before we started today, we're going to go through who you are, how you got there, and what you do. But what I really appreciated the most was you never asked me why I do it. And I don't know if you intentionally did that or if that's just part of who you are. The word why triggers me. So when we talk about the too much, I was met with, why are you so loud? Why are you always moving? Why don't you get it? Why isn't this? Why isn't it that? And when you say the word why, it comes across like intense, right? It's got a sharp edge to it. But when you say, help me understand that, how did you get there? What does that mean to you? Even your tone of voice, my whole body changes, it relaxes. So as a child, I grew up feeling like nothing I could ever do was good enough, was right, or was appropriate. And I would say 80% of my life, now that I look back on it and I'm healing my inner child, I realize that I grew up with that frame of reference for most of my life.
Yeah, that's so powerful, the word why. And as I'm listening to you and I'm listening to you replay those questions, they're hitting home for me personally and with my own children and because I've had my own experiences. And I immediately felt judgment with the why. And I'm wondering, does that light up for you also? I'm imagining that landing on me and I'm feeling judged and I'm also feeling confused in terms of what do you mean why? And not knowing the answer. I don't know why. It's just, isn't that what you do? Or I don't know, should I have not done that? It feels confusing to me, especially if I imagine it through the lens of being a child.
Yeah. So, gosh, absolutely. All of that, the judgment, everything I said, I felt like was being judged. And I remember being a young adult and being in a conversation with my parents and them saying, you're so sensitive and you think everything is against you. And as an older adult, middle-aged adult, I realize now it's because that's what I was brought up to believe by them unintentionally. So every time they said why, or I was too much, or just get over it, or do as I say, not as I do, or any of those things, it not only led to judgment, it led to confusion, and it led to a spiral of confusion around how could I be so wrong about how I see the world? I've never actually, that makes me want to like actually throw up. I hate to say that, but that's what that just led me to say out loud. And I've never said that. How is it possible that I see the world and at that point wrong?
Yeah. Can we stay there for a moment? Not that I want you to throw up, but I'm just curious. Like, that's a pretty intense somatic response. And I'm just curious, like, what else arises for you as you stay in that place of how could I be so wrong about the world?
It makes so much more sense now that the years that I spent that I'm learning now through my therapist that I've been with for 6 years, who is a somatic master. She's also a EMDR therapist. She also is a cranial sacral master. So she's got all those intersectionalities, Jody, of the therapist, but also those other modalities. I go to cranial sacral therapist and I hit burnout. My cranial rhythm was so off. And she had been working with me for, I think, 7 years at the time and thought, oh my gosh, I've never felt your cranial rhythm this off. Didn't understand it. However, I appreciated the fact that she wasn't judging me. She was leaning into it and trying to help me heal it. And what comes up for me now is just how far I've come in healing myself and just how I saw the world and how I see the world isn't wrong. It's that much of society doesn't see it the way I do. And they've asked me to live in a world that was never built for me. And today I get to choose who I let into my world. I don't have to just deal with the world. I can actually embrace and surround myself with those that light me up, that are good energy for me, that fit my capacity, my vision, my values. And there are enough people in the world for everyone, but I don't need to be there for everyone. And so it felt really bad, but now it's feeling a lot lighter. So I feel like I'm in a session with my therapist because those are things that she would go through with me, right? She's done all these modalities and she never named them either. And I think that's another thing is I felt like I was labeled as that bad kid. I talked too much and it was because of my social anxiety, not because I wanted to talk too much. I didn't pay attention or I got distracted. It wasn't because I was a bad kid. It's because I'm an ADHDer. But my ADHD shows up way differently than if there was a woman sitting right next to me or a man sitting next to me or a child sitting next to me. They all show up differently, but none of it's wrong. It's just different. And the fact that I could get through that conversation with you right now without crying just tells me how far I've come.
Yeah. What are you noticing right now in this moment as you even say that?
I'm noticing expansion in my capacity. And what I mean by that, I'm sure you understand, I don't know if your audience will, but I'm understanding just how much the work that I'm doing with my therapist for myself is not only healing my inner child, it's healing my adult self.
Mhm.
It's healing me through my stages of burnout, through my recovering people pleaser. I lived in fawning much of my life without realizing it. It's even clearer how I got to full burnout. And I sometimes will say I was burnt to ashes, and I'm now coming back through it a much stronger, better version of my younger self, a better version of what I thought was my best self around 15 years old. I'm now even a better version of that because I'm taking all the things that worked then as an athlete, where I felt most comfortable was in the gym, where people we get yelled at? Sure. We grew up in a time where that's how they thought pushing you was the right thing to do, but they never abused me. Some might say they abused their power in it, but I always took it as I had a choice to walk into that gym every day and train between 5.5 and 8 hours a day, depending on if it was regular season or summer season. and everything was year round. But in the summer, we could train a lot longer because we didn't have school. And I always saw it as a safe haven, whereas others saw it as a overwhelmingly volatile place in the 80s and 70s, in this late 70s, 80s, and 90s. But for me, the gym was my safe space.
Lisa, can you share with us, and I think I know, but what sport
I was a
were you
gymnast. I was
gymnast?
an
Yeah,
elite level gymnast in the
that's what I
80s.
thought. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So can we pause here for a moment? Because
absolutely.
I'm really curious about this for you. So here you're living in this world that doesn't totally make sense to you. And what you know now, obviously looking back, is that there was something about the embodiment of being a gymnast and the ability to move your body and be upside down and be in high places and all of the things that come along with that was probably very healing to your nervous system, helped balance you, ground you, all of the things. We can look back and be like, oh, that makes sense. At the time, and I don't know if you're able to bring yourself back there. What was that like for you? I hear you talking about the gym being your safe place. It was like your haven. It's where, I'm not sure if you're saying it's where you got to be you, but I'm curious.
It is.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Okay, yeah. And so can you say, just go a little bit deeper there, just in terms of like the embodiment piece and what it was like to be in the body of an elite gymnast who was also really struggling with this world outside of the gym.
Yeah. And interestingly, Jody, unknowingly struggling inside the gym. I'll get to that. I'm going to write that down because I'll forget to say it, because that will go back to the very first thing I asked you about removing your background because of my visual processing disorder, right? So I'm going to go to that in a minute. But sometimes I'll say to people, and some people will correct me and say how I'm saying it is wrong, but this is how I perceive it. So this is my reality. I'm not lying. It's just my reality, is that my body knew what I needed before my mind did. And before clearly I understood. And when I was 5 years old, I was four, I think at the time. Yeah, I was in nursery school, I was four, and somebody did a cartwheel. And I remember going home. I remember the girl's name was Beth, and I remember going home and saying, Mom, I want to go to Parkettes. That's the gym I trained at my entire career. So people came and went. I lived my entire career there. The founders were at my wedding. I grew up with their kids. We all grew up in the gym together. We were gym rats. And from that very first day, I said, I want to go to Parkettes. I want to do what Jody's doing. And we had a Monday tumbling class and I loved it. I remember there was one day that I said, Mom, I don't want to go to I don't want to go to class. I want to stay home and play with my friends. And I stayed home that one day. I remember my mom calling the coach, who ended up being one of my coaches as an elite level, because she taught that Monday class, but she was also taught the team. And she said, just let her stay home. My mom was like, no, you have to go. And she's like, no, just let her stay home. If she wants to come back, she'll come back. Until I started getting injured in my teenage years, that was the only time I remember not wanting to go to the gym, because little did I know, not only did it feel safe to me, but it was the place that I got to be my truest, most honest self without judgment. And it's interesting because some people will go, but you were judged every day in the gym. You were judged for your weight. You were judged for your toe point. You were judged for your flexibility. You wore a leotard that showed off most of your body. And then in competitions, you were judged down to how, if you smiled, if you stuck a landing. So you were judged for every single little thing. But I think inside of me, I felt like, but that's what I trained for. That's what I asked for. I was trying to reach my goal of being an Olympic level athlete. And I reached that goal of being an Olympic level athlete, but I never reached my dream of becoming an Olympian. And that's something I don't know if I've ever said out loud either, but it is different. I was on the junior national team, not the senior national team, because of my age. When I look at my all around and my skill level as a junior national team member, I could have been on the senior national team, but I was too young to be. And then injuries took place and all of that. It was healing to my nervous system. Absolutely. The spinning, the flipping, the more I did, the heightened thing. Yet, unknowingly, I had visual processing disorder. And so I learned about that when my youngest was maybe 10. He's now 15, so probably about 5 or 6 years ago. it would have been more. He must have been 8 because it was before COVID. I was in his vision therapist office and we were shifting him from in person to an on home online program where he had to track different things. He had some tracking things, but also some depth perception. And I'll never forget the woman's name was Sima. I adored her. Still to this day, just so thankful for the work she did with my son. And she looked at me and she said, "You were an elite level gymnast. You competed all around because back when I did it, there were no specialties. You had to do all 4 events. Bars and floor were always my best events. And now I know why. Now bar mounts were always hard for me. And now I know why. So my visual processing is the depth perception and the peripheral. So when you think about driving in a car, you know how there's like a little, I don't know if it's still on there, but on the side view mirrors and the rear view mirror, it used to say objects in this mirror are closer than they appear.
Yeah.
That's my eyes. And so anytime, for those that don't know gymnastics, anytime I was running toward the springboard to do a vault, that board was moving. So people, my coaches would be like, "What's wrong? Why do you keep changing your steps?" As I got older and as you until you're 26, my understanding now is that your brain's not fully developed. So as things were evolving and changing, as I was getting older, things kept changing even more. When I went to do a mount on the balance beam or a mount on the uneven bars, I really couldn't gauge how far or close I was to that equipment, how close or far I was to the bar, how close or far I was to the beam. And then beam dismounts, I had, other than my back fractures, I had my worst injuries on beam dismounts. And come to realize now, it's because the beam looked like it shifted, even though it was stagnant, because my eyes were playing tricks on me. And so somebody said to me, and it might have been Simon, and other people have said this to me too, "Wow, how did you do the level of gymnastics that you did with that difference?"
That's what I'm wondering. Like, how did you grab the bars?
It was the mount was the hard part. Once I was on the equipment and the equipment wasn't moving, I was fine in that middle. And
Okay.
because the equipment wasn't moving, it was when I had to do a mount because I was coming from off to
Off.
on and
Uh-huh.
then on to off. So it
Okay.
was in those transitions that, and even on vault, if I did something not knowing from the board to the horse, right? So that change of, wow, wait, my body is going, wait, it's closer, it's farther. And so I was so inconsistent on those events, but for a very good reason that we didn't know. So people will say sometimes, well, you're even more resilient than you knew, and your body was adapting. So think about how hard it was for me to do what I did had I known what I know now, how much easier and how much farther I might have gotten, how many injuries I may not have had because we were able to work with it. The reason I've shifted now to work with the arena too is I walked into the gym that I trained at, and the coaches, our owner's daughter is one of the head coaches now. And 2 years ago, I walked in and I looked at someone doing a vault and I was watching how they ran. And I said to the person, her name was Trisha, I said, "Trish, does this happen often, what I just saw?" She's like, "Yeah." I said, "Do you remember?" We'll go down the whole story. "When your dad would say this to me and this," she's like, "Yeah, I do. That used to happen to you all the time." I said to her, "Ask her to go see a vision therapist. Ask her to get assessed. I am guessing, not a doctor, but I'm guessing there's something going on with her depth perception because of this, because of what I learned about my child. And then I then in turn learned about me. It wasn't a label, it was data to inform how we work together. I was then able to give that to a person as a coach who didn't recognize that there was a neuro difference. And most coaches don't think they're working with kids that are neurodivergent because we mask it so well, especially when we're in a gym where the rest of our body feels wonderful. So I was healing my nervous system, but then I was also working against my visual problems.
Yeah, which is really fascinating in terms of tension. And some might say that the visual processing difficulties that you are having was part of what kept you there also. Because we don't know what we don't know. And I'm as you listening to your story, I'm imagining like you can look back and say, oh, that makes so much sense. But at the time, you didn't know that you were seeing things differently than anybody else does. And so,
In fact, my dad, when I told my dad that, the first thing he said was, how come no one ever told us that? I said, that's a really good question, Dad. And the answer is because we didn't know we didn't know. It was an unknown. I'm in my 50s. We didn't know those things back in the there weren't visual vision therapists like there are now. There's some famous football players that I remember one of them, I can't remember who it was. He played for Arizona Cardinals at one point, but he was on the wall in my son's vision therapist. And I said, what is he doing on the wall? They're like, oh, he had vision therapy because the better he could track the ball, the more in tuned he was with how to run to it without even watching it. And so there's so many fascinating things that happen now because of what we do know, but we didn't know it back then.
absolutely. And just, I don't know, my mind is going all over the place. I'm just thinking about the range and how we all fall along this spectrum, and every behavior is functional, right? And so I'm like thinking about you noticing this gymnast and noticing her gait and what she's doing, and it felt familiar to you because it was I imagine in watching it you could feel it in your own body and make those connections. But if you don't have that reference point, it goes back to that question of why. Why are you doing that? Why are you slowing down? Why are you skipping a beat? Why are you? And the answer is I don't know, because it's just our nervous system will automatically adjust to what seems the safest, right? Because it's trying to protect us and keep us alive. And so, yeah, there's just so many layers to that. But I want to pause here for a moment because you said something really powerful, and I just want to highlight it. And that was it wasn't a label, it was information. Can we just dig a little bit deeper into that? Because I think that so many people are resistant to either getting help or seeking someone. I don't want a label. I don't want my child labeled. I don't, and yeah, to the detriment, I think, of personhood. Because once we understand ourselves and the way our nervous system works, the more we can be who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. That ties in, you're asking me about what I do. So I'll tie that in just briefly to what I do, and then we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
So, as a neurodiversity consultant, that's what I call myself when I walk into school meetings because advocacy often gets met with the arms crossed, a pushback. Special education is a box. And my background is very eclectic. And part of what I do is that I have certifications in special education advocacy. I have a certification in executive functioning. I have a certification in parent behavioral because for my oldest, when he had ABA therapy in California, in order to get those services, they had to be wrapped around with parent because if you can't do that, you never implement and sustain with fidelity across the board. So if we're not working together, if we're not learning together, we're working against or not learning at all. And in knowing all those things, I can continue. So many times I find myself sharing that information, not necessarily because I want to talk about all of my great things that I do, but because the world that we live in, oftentimes people don't trust or respect you until you share all that detail. So, and it's interesting because sometimes people will say, don't talk about yourself. And ironically, I hate talking about myself. I literally is the least favorite thing for me to do. Now, talking about neurodiversity, talking about the work that I do and who I help, love that. But I don't like talking about myself. But what's happened is I've been forced to do that over time. You've got to get this certification. You have to get this SPHR behind your name. If you don't have a master's degree, you have to have these letters in order to feel to be seen in society as respected or viable. And to me, all those things over the years were truly just that labels. What I learned in when I was in HR leadership is I would hire these people that were amazing PhD economists, social scientists, all sorts of master's and PhD programs. Yet when they were trying to implement and execute on the actual work that needed to happen, they could not do it. They had the letters behind their name, they had the papers to show for it, but they were not able to put it into practical application. And so in some ways, that's all those years ago was when, again, I felt like I wasn't free to be me because I had to get a certification or I had to get something in order to get hired into a role. And it was more about them than about me. And I understood that piece of it. But at the same time, so what? When I got diagnosed with anxiety in my 20s, I was given medicine and they told me, take this. The problem was, and this actually just came into clarity for me like a week ago. So it's really interesting we're talking about this, Judy. I said, somebody was asking me something. I'm like, you know what? Now that I think about it, they gave me a label and sent me on my way with
Mhm.
medicine. What they didn't do was ever tell me, what do I do with this? How do I manage it? How do I learn how to work with it? How do I educate myself on it? And sometimes, how do I help educate others on it? And so as I moved more and more into this work, and in the business world, I call myself a neurodivergent success partner. I am neurodivergent and I am a success partner. I could call myself a neurodifferent success partner, but people don't, that would just bring up way more questions than it would like curiosity. And so I intentionally call myself certain things. But what I don't call myself is ADHD. I don't call my son autistic. They're parts of who we are. And I will state that I'm an ADHDer. I will state that I have executive functioning struggles in order to help people understand. Now, I'm going to tell you what that means to me and how that can impact you. If I don't take notes, I don't retain things. If I don't take notes, I'll interject in you. So it helps people understand who I am. But the problem is across society, when you become vulnerable and comfortable enough to share those things, they are often met with either misunderstanding, lack of understanding, or unwillingness to get curious. And so, what happens is the people that you're talking with will respond with a lecture or respond with get over it, will respond with you have to learn to live in this society. And for those of us that have lived in a society that wasn't built for us for years and work in that gray space of piecing together a world that wasn't created for the masses,
Mhm.
even though somebody said it was, because somebody said so, it becomes it. The more you remove the label, the more you remove the systemic issues, and you look at the internal and then the relational, then the systemic, that's where we can move together. So the diagnostic information informs how we then go about collaborating, engaging, and supporting. But when somebody is not willing to use that information to support, instead they're using that information to become divisive, the person at the other end that's being vulnerable and sharing that with you shuts down, will get combative, and then they look like the person who is the aggressor when really we're the ones that are being dismissed.
As I'm listening to you talk about this and imagining what it's like to share with somebody that you're in relationship with, and whether that's a friend or boss, a family member, a loved one, or even a parent or a child, there's a level of vulnerability and I'm just going to say this because it's coming through, a wish for being seen. And the risk in that is if the other person isn't able or willing to see you, it's incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And for an adult who grew up in a world where they were not seen, that becomes really difficult. And then that leads to what we call masking, which we know has tremendous impact on our nervous system, our mood, our sense of self, our spirituality, substance abuse, escapism, all of the things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, speaking of being vulnerable, right, I call it the snow globe. My brain sometimes turns into a snow globe where all of these ideas and messages are like floating around. And I
I love that visual. I
yeah,
can
I
see
know. I can't
it.
grab. So I have to kind of wait for it to settle until I can grab the one. And I do, it's interesting because, okay, so I'll just talk about myself for a quick second along these same lines. As an adult, I had to learn to tell people when I was processing because what it would look like is it would look like I would completely shut down and it would take me a long time to answer. Someone would ask me a question and I wouldn't answer right away. And I learned to say, hold on, give me a minute, I'm processing this. or I'm having a snow globe moment. Just give me, and my clients as a therapist, that happens a lot.
And
And
I bet you it makes them feel at ease. Wow, she needs a moment to process too.
yeah,
To
I
me,
hope so.
that's healing and that's empowering to hear a therapist say that to someone.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'm always met with, yeah, take your time. Because I think people really want to hear. I'll say something like, wait a minute, I'm trying to think of something really brilliant to say. So I guess what I'm coming back to is, yeah, is so I'm checking in with my body. It's like there's a sense of freedom and relief in being able to share that with somebody. And I think the older we are, maybe the less afraid we feel. And if I could offer anything to a young person around this, is really understanding how their brain and their system works so that they can explain it to others and so that others can meet them where they are instead of trying to guess. Because I think on the other side of this is we go back to kind of coming full circle. We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I know we talked about that book chapter that I had written, and I think
Yeah.
sharing what you shared, I love what you just shared. And you said it's a sense of freedom and relief to be able to feel comfortably uncomfortable enough to be that vulnerable. That's what I would add on to that and to share that with someone, especially when it is a person that you don't necessarily trust, but you want them to try to see you so that you can de-escalate a situation. And yet, the absolute worst thing that can happen, which has happened, is you're met with lecture, you're met with dismissiveness, which then ends up escalating the person who was just vulnerable because now your nervous system is saying, I'm at risk of not being safe because this person is doing something that isn't in alignment with what I just shared. It isn't coming with curiosity. It's saying to own your trauma or own your circumstances or those types of statements. And the hardest thing is in the work that I do is allowing myself to just stop and realize no matter how many times I express it, all I can say is I was at a very vulnerable place. I opened up to you to try to help de-escalate something and you took advantage of it. And while you think you helped in how you were doing it, you then became and invaded my space, mocked me, things like that. Yet in others' perspectives, it wasn't what happens, right? And so with my parents, for example, when I would say I would shut down because I just would get just tired of them asking me things. And they would say, you were ignoring me or you were being dismissive to me because I didn't say something. But then if I said something, then I was being combative or I was wrong. Why would you say that? So those were the things that I grew up with I can't win. No matter what I do, I can't win. And so when I got asked to write a chapter in a book, and I've always wanted to be a writer. I'm an author. I've always been a writer, but I've always done poetry and I've written and things like that. But the person who asked me, Julie DeLuca Collins, and the name of the book we've talked about, but my chapter in it is it's chapter 12 in the book, and it's Unbecoming to Become, Finding Clarity in the Chaos. And I talk about the moment that I realized I didn't need to be the strong one. I talk about my burnout. I talk about moving through that. And I also share where I've come to a couple of different places and pieces that come together to show people how I got back to this place of really being free to be me. And then at another level, like in a different space, it shares a little bit about my conversations with some of my clients, one as a parent and one as a professional, one as a female, one as a male. So I did a couple different versions, both that needed to unpack what was going on within them in order to really be able to move forward, one in partnership with me for a child, and the other in partnership with me to get their role that they deserve to be in another organization, but also get their marriage back on track. I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not a counselor at all, but the work that we did together allowed them to actually succeed in numerous areas, not just one. And in some ways, we were healing each other through those conversations, not expecting anything from one another, going through the journey together. And that's part of what I think about the chapter that was written. What it helped me do is get to a place where every day and the work I do with my therapist, some of the things that you asked me to pause on, I get to become more free to be me every single day because I'm showing up as myself. I'm being vulnerable. And I'm learning that even if I'm met with some of those reactions, I should never stop being free to be me. I don't need to try to fit into a society because there's a lot of people in society that are willing to see me for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so powerful. And just being willing and able to own those parts of you and
Yeah.
reclaim, come back to remember. Maybe
I
that's
think
a,
reclaim is a remember first, back to, and then reclaim. I think actually all three of those,
yeah,
Jody, hit me. You know,
yeah,
you have to remember them to come back to them. I'm writing this down because I love this to be able to reclaim them. I almost feel like it's a whole that's a whole journey in itself. First you remember,
absolutely.
then you come back to, and then you reclaim because remembering it brought up so many bad things. And I had to be courageous enough to work through them to get clear on what I actually wanted to come back to and what I wanted to let go of.
So choice,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah,
really important too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, Lisa, as we're starting to wrap up, is there anything that we did not talk about today? I'm sure there's a lot we did not did not talk about, but anything in particular that you would really like the audience to know?
I would say that I hope that at least one thing that we shared today resonates and that everybody has the ability to either remember who they were, come back to who that person is, reclaim their best self, or uncover what that best self may look like for the very first time. I
Yeah,
feel like if I can do it, anyone can. And that's I think where that chapter and why I had shared earlier, I'd be happy to gift that to people that are interested in reading it. And the whole book's great, but that's really what this all comes back to. I had no idea, Jody, what we were going to talk about today, but I feel like I just got a free therapy session. It was very healing. So I appreciate it.
you are welcome. I'm so glad and honored that you were able to be here today. And just for folks who want the full title of the book that you're referring to, again, it's called Confident You: The Raw Conversations, Real Stories of Courage, Healing, and Redefining Confidence. And I will link that in the show notes if
Okay.
people want the full book. And you are graciously offering your chapter for anyone who wants to read it. And I'll put the information about how to get that in the show notes as
Okay.
well. And if people want to reach you, what's the best way to get you?
Absolutely. So my website is journey, the number two, bloom.com. There's a contact form there. My email address is also on there, which is Lisa at journey, the number two, bloom.com. I'm also on Insta, Facebook, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn and Facebook are my name, and Insta is at journey, the number two, bloom. You can get me through any of those avenues and feel free to reach out. I do little video snippets and hopefully something we shared today. And if you're interested in learning more, that's how you can get me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa.
Thank you for having me.